Jessica Martin thought she had lost her husband forever, until she saw Mark alive, walking toward his own funeral, and her world collapsed in an instant. Please subscribe for daily new update of crime story and watch till end. Jessica Martin woke up to the faint hum of her alarm, but the usual warmth of her home felt hollow. The house that had once echoed with laughter now seemed empty, like a shell of her former life. 2 weeks had passed since Mark, her husband, vanished without a trace. The police had visited her multiple times, taking statements and promises of further investigation, but every call left her with the same chilling emptiness, a feeling that the trail had gone cold. Each day blurred into the next, with her only companions being unanswered phone calls and the gnawing uncertainty of Mark's fate. She remembered the last night she had seen him. He had kissed her forehead, whispering that he would be back before the weekend ended, but that night had come and gone. The following morning he was gone, leaving behind a neatly folded shirt and an empty coffee mug. The neighbors tried to console her, offering half-hearted reassurances, but Jessica knew something darker was at play. There were no signs of a struggle, no forced entry, no clues pointing to an accident. It was as if Mark had simply evaporated. Then came the letter. It arrived on a chilly Tuesday morning, sliding through the mailbox like it had been waiting for her. No return address, no stamp of origin, just a single envelope with her name written in careful, unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was a photograph, glossy and slightly crumpled, showing Mark standing in front of an abandoned warehouse miles away from town. The warehouse was a dark, decaying structure, its windows like empty eyes staring into the void. Mark looked ordinary in the picture, dressed in a jacket and jeans, but the expression on his face was strange, calm, almost unreadable. Jessica's hands shook as she traced the edges of the photograph. Her mind raced with questions. Was this proof that he was alive, or was it a cruel prank designed to torment her? She didn't know who would do such a thing, or why, but a spark of hope flared inside her. She imagined the moment of reunion, the possibility that Mark had been trapped somewhere, hiding, or forced to disappear. Yet, beneath the hope was a creeping sense of fear. If he was alive, why hadn't he contacted her directly? Why this anonymous message? For days, Jessica stared at the photo, replaying every memory she had of him. She drove past the warehouse, cautiously, never daring to get too close. The place seemed abandoned, overgrown with weeds, and the air smelled of rust and neglect. She imagined Mark standing there, waiting for her to find him, but the thought brought both relief and dread. Her nights became restless, filled with dreams where he appeared in shadows, whispering warnings she couldn't understand. Friends urged her to focus on her own safety, to consider that perhaps Mark had chosen to leave, that maybe he was never coming back. But Jessica couldn't accept that. Every instinct in her body told her that he was alive somewhere, and the photograph was proof. And so, with a mix of terror and determination, she resolved to keep searching, unaware that her life was about to take a turn far darker than she could imagine. The sense of unease that had been growing quietly now settled like a storm inside her chest, and she knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The day of the funeral arrived with a gray, overcast sky that seemed to mirror Jessica's mood. She had spent the morning in a haze of preparation, arranging flowers, choosing the right dress, and trying to steady the trembling in her hands. Friends and family trickled into the small chapel, their faces etched with sorrow and sympathy. Jessica walked among them, nodding faintly, forcing smiles that felt empty. The coffin rested at the front, polished and silent, a cold reminder of the life she had lost. As the ceremony began, the pastor's voice echoed softly through the chapel, speaking words that blurred into the background for Jessica. Her mind was elsewhere, fixated on the photograph that had ignited a spark of hope weeks earlier. She couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that Mark's disappearance was not what it seemed. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow that flickered against the walls made her heart race. She tried to calm herself, telling herself that she needed closure, that this funeral was the step toward accepting the unimaginable. Outside, the sky darkened slightly, and a light drizzle began to fall. turning the grass into slick patches of green. Jessica's thoughts wandered to the mysterious warehouse, to the strange photograph, and to the nagging sense that something was about to happen. She tried to focus on the mourners, on the gentle murmur of condolences, but her eyes kept darting toward the chapel entrance, anticipating something she couldn't yet name. Then she saw him. At first it was just a figure walking slowly along the path outside the chapel, indistinct beneath a dark coat. Jessica froze, her breath catching in her throat. As he drew closer, every detail became clearer: the familiar gait, the tilt of the head, the way his coat hawked loosely over his frame. It was Mark, her husband, her missing husband, alive and walking calmly toward the grave. Her chest tightened, and the world seemed to tilt around her. No one else seemed to notice. Friends continued to whisper among themselves. The pastor continued his sermon, and yet Jessica's eyes were locked on him. Mark's expression was unreadable, his eyes scanning the crowd, finally resting on hers for a fleeting moment. The connection was instant, electric and terrifying. Her legs felt heavy, as if cement had seeped into her bones. She wanted to scream, to run, to warn everyone, but the sound caught in her throat. He stopped briefly near the edge of the graveyard, turned, and then vanished behind a cluster of trees. The sudden disappearance left Jessica gasping, her hands clutching at her chest. A cold sweat covered her skin, and she stumbled backward, barely steadying herself on a nearby pew. Muffled whispers and concerned glances surrounded her, but she couldn't hear them. All she could think about was the impossibility of what she had seen. The coffin continued to lower into the ground, the ceremony moving forward as if nothing had happened. Jessica's heart pounded, a chaotic rhythm of fear, shock, and disbelief. Questions flooded her mind. How could he be alive? Was this a cruel trick, or had Mark been hiding from everyone for weeks, orchestrating a plan she could not yet comprehend? The chapel seemed to shrink around her, trapping her in a bubble of terror. She knew in that instant that nothing in her life would ever feel safe or real again. Jessica could barely breathe. Her vision blurred, and the world seemed to tilt as if the ground itself had betrayed her. The figure she had seen, Mark, was no longer just a distant silhouette. He had been alive, walking calmly toward her husband's grave, and now he had vanished behind the trees. The crowd remained oblivious, murmuring condolences and adjusting flowers, but Jessica felt trapped in a nightmare she couldn't wake from. Every heartbeat thumped violently against her chest, each one echoing the impossible reality. Mark was alive, and she had believed him dead. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of what she had seen. Had she imagined it? No. The photograph, the memory of him walking, every detail was etched clearly in her mind. The chill in the air prickled her skin, mixing with the adrenaline surging through her veins. She stumbled back, gripping the pew for support, her fingers trembling. The pastor's words became a faint hum, distant and unimportant, as her eyes scanned the trees where Mark had disappeared. She wanted to run after him, to call out his name, but something held her frozen, a paralyzing shock that rooted her in place. As she struggled to steady her breathing, a wave of nausea and dizziness washed over her. The bright colors of the flowers, the polished wood of the coffin, and the soft gray of the chapel walls all seemed to blur together. Memories of the last 2 weeks, his disappearance, the unanswered calls, the photograph, flooded her mind in a chaotic torrent. Each memory pressed against her chest, making it hard to think, hard to focus, hard to survive the moment. She felt as if the world itself was closing in, shrinking around her, trapping her with the impossible truth she could not escape. The light drizzle outside had turned into a steady patter, and the faint smell of rain mixed with the scent of flowers and damp earth. Jessica's knees buckled, and she sank slowly toward the ground. Panic clawed at her throat, making words impossible to form. Her vision narrowed to a tunnel, with Mark's figure, alive and unreachable, at the end. She realized she was utterly alone in her awareness, the only person in the chapel who had seen the impossible. The isolation pressed down on her, heavier than the weight of grief she had already carried for weeks. Her chest tightened further, a crushing pressure that stole her breath. Every attempt to inhale felt like a battle against an invisible force. Time slowed, stretching each second into an eternity of fear and disbelief. She wanted someone, anyone, to understand, to see what she had seen, but the world continued as if nothing had happened. Her heartbeat raced uncontrollably, each thump echoing in her ears like a warning. Then, without warning, her body gave in. Jessica collapsed, her arms flailing briefly before she crumpled onto the cold ground. Gasps and cries erupted around her, hands reaching out to steady her, but she could no longer respond. Darkness began to edge her vision as her body convulsed with the shock of what she had witnessed. The impossible sight of her husband alive at his own funeral had shattered the fragile barrier between fear and reality. In that moment, Jessica Martin, once full of hope, was overcome by a terror so profound that it would mark the beginning of a mystery far darker than anyone in that chapel could imagine. After Jessica's sudden collapse, the authorities quickly took over the scene. Paramedics arrived to confirm what everyone feared. She had passed away from what appeared to be a massive heart attack, triggered by extreme shock. The small chapel was left in stunned silence, whispers of disbelief echoing among mourners. Yet even in her death, the mystery of Mark's sudden appearance could not be ignored. Local police reopened the case, determined to uncover the truth behind his disappearance, and to understand why Jessica had seen him alive at the funeral. Detectives began retracing every step of Mark's recent life. They visited neighbors, co-workers, and anyone who might have had contact with him in the weeks before his disappearance. Everyone reported the same story. Mark had been withdrawn, secretive, and oddly insistent on keeping certain routines private. He had seemed distracted, often disappearing for hours without explanation, and sometimes returning home with a strange, almost nervous energy. No one had suspected anything criminal, yet the sudden collapse of his wife and his vanishing presence cast a shadow over his ordinary life. The investigation took a chilling turn when detectives reviewed surveillance footage from areas around town and nearby highways. Forensic experts traced his movements, revealing something shocking. Mark had been living under a false identity for months. He had obtained fake identification, rented vehicles under different names, and even opened temporary bank accounts to conceal his activities. The picture became darker with every new piece of evidence. Mark had meticulously planned his disappearance, orchestrating every detail so carefully that no one, not even Jessica, had suspected the truth. Detectives uncovered more unsettling clues when they discovered a small rented cabin in a neighboring state. It was isolated, hidden deep within a cluster of trees, with no obvious neighbors and limited access to main roads. The cabin's interior revealed a disturbing level of premeditation. Hidden compartments contained multiple passports, stacks of cash, and personal notes detailing his movements and intentions. Investigators realized that this was not a simple disappearance. It was a carefully calculated plan designed to mislead, manipulate, and control. The question of motive remained a puzzle. Was Mark fleeing legal trouble, attempting financial fraud, or covering a secret life he had hidden from everyone? His meticulous planning suggested more than mere desperation. It suggested an obsession with control, a desire to manipulate those closest to him, and perhaps a need to witness the chaos left in his absence. Every discovery deepened the mystery, leaving investigators with more questions than answers. While police worked tirelessly to track him down, rumors spread through the town. People whispered about sightings in other states, mysterious phone calls from unknown numbers, and letters that seemed to appear out of nowhere. The more authorities dug, the more they realized the extent of Mark's deception. He had vanished completely from ordinary life, leaving only traces of calculated misdirection. The photograph sent to Jessica weeks earlier was no coincidence. It had been a carefully planted breadcrumb, a subtle tease meant to manipulate her emotion. Even as the investigation continued, one fact became painfully clear. Mark had played a dangerous, twisted game from the start. Jessica's death was just the first consequence of his plan, a horrifying reminder of the lengths to which someone could go to control reality and bend the lives of those around him. The deeper detectives dug, the more sinister the picture became, and the haunting question lingered. If he could vanish once, could he vanish again, and what would he do the next time he emerged from the shadows? Months passed after Jessica's death, and the investigation into Mark Martin's disappearance had stalled. Detectives had followed every lead, contacted informants, and even traced his financial records, but he seemed to have vanished into thin air. Then, a hiker exploring a remote trail in a neighboring state stumbled upon something unusual: a small, weathered cabin, partially hidden by thick trees. The hikers' curiosity led them closer, and inside they found a scene that sent shivers down everyone's spine. The cabin had been abandoned for months, but it contained evidence of a life meticulously planned and obsessively monitored. Inside, the walls were plastered with newspaper clippings, photographs, and handwritten notes. Many of the clippings reported Mark's disappearance, Jessica's tragic death, and details of the reopened investigation. It was as if he had been following the story closely, documenting each event with a disturbing precision. Every corner of the cabin revealed careful preparation. Hidden compartments contained multiple fake IDs, cash hidden in various containers, and letters that had never been sent. The letters were addressed to Jessica, written during the weeks he was supposedly dead, each one revealing a chilling glimpse into his mind. They spoke of control, observation, and the perfect illusion, as if he had orchestrated his entire disappearance and her death as part of some cruel game. Detectives who examined the cabin felt a growing unease. The level of detail suggested more than a man running from the law. It suggested obsession, a need to manipulate and control the lives of those around him. They discovered lists with her daily routines, notes about people who might suspect him, and calculations of how long it would take for authorities to conclude she had died. The letters were particularly haunting. Some contained descriptions of how he imagined Jessica discovering the truth, how her shock would unfold, and how he would watch from the shadows. The cabin also contained items that hinted at a darker side. There were hidden cameras, notebooks filled with coded messages, and carefully plotted escape routes leading from the cabin to nearby forests and roads. Investigators realized that Mark had been hiding in plain sight, watching the aftermath of his disappearance while remaining undetected. Every step he had taken, every trick he had played, was documented with meticulous care. It became clear that he had engineered his disappearance not only to avoid capture, but also to orchestrate a series of events that would terrorize Jessica and manipulate the people around him. As authorities combed through the cabin, a sense of foreboding grew. There were no signs of how long he might have been gone, or where he had gone next. The meticulously hidden letters and notes painted a portrait of a man capable of extreme deception and calculated cruelty. Jessica's sudden death, once considered a tragic accident, now appeared almost inevitable in the context of Mark's obsessive planning. It was as if every decision he had made had been designed to create fear, confusion, and suffering for those he left behind. Even as investigators collected the evidence, one fact became painfully clear: Mark Martin's mind was far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. He had vanished, leaving a trail of meticulously planned chaos, a haunting legacy of control and manipulation, and a mystery that seemed destined to continue. The cabin, hidden and abandoned, became a symbol of his dark ingenuity, a chilling reminder that some people are capable of orchestrating horrors that extend far beyond the reach of ordinary understanding. The months that followed the discovery of Mark's cabin were filled with tension and unanswered questions. Authorities had combed every inch of the property, uncovering the hidden letters, cameras, and fake identities he had prepared. Yet Mark himself remained elusive, as if he had disappeared from existence entirely. The investigation had become a chilling game of cat and mouse, with the authorities realizing that every lead only brought more questions, more uncertainty, and more fear. People in the small towns he had touched whispered rumors of sightings, brief glimpses of a man resembling Mark Martin walking calmly through streets or sitting in distant cafes, always gone before anyone could approach him. Then came the anonymous video. It arrived at a local news channel with no return address or explanation. The footage was shaky, grainy, but unmistakable. Mark was walking down a quiet street in a small town, hundreds of miles from where he had last been seen. He looked alive, unhurried, almost content, and the world around him continued unaware of the chaos he had left behind. There were no clues about who had filmed it or why it was sent, and no one knew if it was taken recently or weeks ago. The video reignited the investigation and sent shockwaves through the community. Mark Martin was alive, moving freely, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop him. The authorities analyzed every piece of evidence collected from the cabin and the previous sightings, trying to anticipate his next move. They realized he had been one step ahead from the very beginning, manipulating situations with precision, creating fear and vanishing without a trace. His motives remained unclear. Was he a criminal genius, a man obsessed with control, or something far darker? Jessica's sudden death was now understood not just as a tragedy, but as a calculated consequence of his manipulation, a direct result of the terror he had orchestrated. Communities remained on edge, especially those who had known him. Friends and neighbors struggled to reconcile the man they had seen daily with the cunning, dangerous figure the investigation revealed. His disappearance became a cautionary tale. The story whispered in hushed tones about deception, obsession, and the unpredictability of human behavior. Jessica's death, once a shocking moment at a small funeral, had grown into a grim symbol of the impact one person's mind could have on others' lives. Despite all the investigation, the one fact that haunted everyone was that Mark Martin remained free. The trail had grown cold in some areas but hot in others, hinting that he might continue to appear unexpectedly, creating fear in those who thought they were safe. No warnings, no messages, just sudden appearances, like the one that had shocked Jessica and ended her life. The world realized that some people could manipulate reality itself, making the impossible terrifyingly real. Even years later, headlines would occasionally revive the story: man seen walking after fake death, mysterious video sparks fear in small town, disappearance and death remain unsolved. The story of Mark Martin, Jessica's tragic shock, and the chilling control he exerted over reality became a haunting legend. In the end, there was no final capture, no resolution, only the lingering question: how many lives could be touched by someone who could vanish at will, leaving chaos and fear in their wake? The nightmare Mark created endured, a haunting testament to the dark ingenuity of a man who played with life, death, and perception, and always seemed to win. If you want, I can now create a complete YouTube-ready package for this story. A SEO-friendly video description, 25 hashtags and 25 keywords, all tailored to attract maximum views for your true crime channel. This will make the story ready to upload. Do you want me to do that next?